record. Okay. Welcome and thank you for coming. Okay, I'm going to do a 3-minute review of what we've discussed thus far. I'm trying for things to go very chronologically in the sense that let's start from the basics and work our way up. We're discussing the topic of life and death, and that's a big topic. It's kind of like everything is life and death. Either it fits into life or it fits into death. Now, here's what we've seen so far. So far, we saw the starting point of all questions of life and death is in Vayikra 18. In Vayikra 18, the Torah tells us, V'chai bahem, you should live through the mitzvot. The mitzvot are what gives you life. That means, the Talmud says that means, V'lo shayamit bahem, you don't die through the mitzvot. That means if somebody, God forbid, has a situation where it's a choice between violate a mitzvah or die, you violate the mitzvah. So if somebody puts a gun to someone's head, a Nazi, God forbid, puts a gun to someone's head and says, either eat this pork sandwich or I will shoot you, you eat the pork sandwich. Now, there are a few exceptions to that rule. Last week, we saw 3 exceptions to that rule, or last time, 3 exceptions to that rule. These 3 exceptions are known as the 3 cardinal sins. One exception is idol worship. If somebody says, either worship idols or I will kill you, a person has to be willing to die. How do we know that? Because the Torah says in the Shema, V'yahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you should love Hashem your God, V'chol levavcha, all your heart, Uv'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, with all your life. It means you have to be willing to love Hashem with all your life. If somebody threatens, either give up your love of God by serving an idol or die, the Torah says in the Shema, you have to be willing to die for that. Love Hashem with all your life. That's one exception to the rule. A second exception to the rule is adultery. When it comes to adultery, if somebody says, and unfortunately in Jewish history this has happened, especially with women who would be captured, and the intent of the captors was very clear that they were going to violate these women. So death comes first before adultery. Now, how do I know that? Because the Torah compares adultery to murder. So we saw that last week, the comparison. Just like by murder, a person has to be willing to die rather than to murder someone else. So too by adultery, a person has to be willing to die rather than to commit adultery. And how by murder itself, which is the third exception, how do I know by murder itself a person has to be willing to die? Rather, that means if a Nazi comes over to someone, God forbid, and says, either kill your friend Johnny or I will kill you, you have to be willing to die. And the source of that is, the Talmud says, logic. It's a svara, it's logic. Because over here, somebody's going to die anyway. Somebody's definitely going to die. Who says your blood is redder than his? Who says your life is more valuable than that person's life? And therefore, logic says that you allow yourself to die rather than kill somebody else. There are more exceptions than what we just saw. Those are just called the 3 cardinal sins. Go ahead, Ben.
What if instead of someone threatening taking your life, they threaten either taking your family's life or they threaten to harm you greatly? Does that, like if someone says, eat this pork sandwich or I'm going to kill your family, do you eat the pork? Does it still apply as an exception?
Absolutely, you would eat the pork sandwich in that case.
Okay.
Just like you would eat the pork sandwich to save your life, you would eat it to save someone else's life, without question. Okay, so that was the starting point. There are a million different corollary laws. Now, I just finished a session with somebody I learned with privately, in which we dealt with a question we're not dealing with today because we're still really basic right now. But we dealt with the following question. If people are going to die anyway, can you make a lottery to give someone over? So in other words, if a Nazi says, the Nazi does not say, either kill Johnny or I'll kill you. Rather, the Nazi says, either kill Johnny or I'll kill the whole city. Now, the law is in that case, are you allowed to, no, hold on. Wrong. I'm sorry, my bad. They don't give a name. They say, give someone over or we'll kill the whole city. In that case, are you allowed to make a lottery to decide who to give over? So that is not what we're discussing. I'm just telling you there's a million different scenarios and cases that could come up. Okay, we're going to keep it very basic now. All right. So the topic we are going to be discussing now is called grama. Grama means indirect damage or indirect murder. Indirect damage or indirect murder. Okay? Let's say the following. Let me give you an extreme case. And as two of you know, in my philosophy class, you prove things through extremes. Because the difference between something that's extreme and not extreme is just emotional. But the logic is the same. So let me give you a really extreme case. Okay? Susie is in 3rd grade. And Susie's teacher yelled at her for missing a decimal spot. Because Susie was humiliated, because she missed where to put the decimal. Of course, there's no teacher that you guys know of who would ever scream at somebody for missing a decimal. But let's just say, Susie missed the decimal, and she got embarrassed. Because she got embarrassed, so her friends made fun of her. Because her friends made fun of her, her self-esteem went down. Because her self-esteem went down, so she was walking on the street, and there was a train coming. And she was lethargic that day. She was walking slow because she was depressed. And the train hit her. Could you call her 3rd grade teacher an accomplice to a murder? Because it was completely indirect. That's an extreme case. I'm just checking my text because it's probably another student.
Wait, didn't we do this in like 6th grade?
No, not that I'm aware of. No one.
I remember like we had to make like videos over a murder, like if it was.
Yeah, okay, but that's what you're talking about is intentional versus unintentional.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about direct versus indirect. Okay. That's case number 1. I think you would all agree that in that case, you can't call the person a murderer. Now, what about this case? And we're going to see the rules and why. We're going to see it all from the Tanakh. We're going to take it slow. I'm just starting off with saying potential cases. What about this case? What about the following case? Okay, let's say I throw somebody into a pool, like of water, nothing to do with Joseph. I throw somebody into a pool, and the person has enough time to get out if they would use all their resources, and they don't. Am I a murderer in that case? So these are cases to think about. What about if I throw a person into a pool and they don't have the opportunity to get out? Okay.
Well, did you like want them to get out? Like what was your mindset?
My mindset.
You wanted them.
My mindset is I'm out to kill. Let's just say.
Oh, okay. Then you're.
So you're saying even if it's indirect and the guy had 10 minutes in the water before their lungs gave way and they died, the fact that they sat there in the water and didn't come out is my fault.
Yeah, he could have helped him.
Put them in a situation where if they didn't do a certain thing, it would result in death.
He also threw him in there, like
right.
Also put him there.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So we're gonna get to all of this. Okay. Perfect. So now I want to start with the Torah. We always start with the Torah because the Talmud is coming from the Torah. So this is the case of murder. This is one of the places the Torah speaks about murder. And I want you here's the question I would like you to be observers for. The Torah is going to mention a case of somebody hitting somebody with a stone, a piece of wood, and a piece of metal. I want you to find me the differences in the Torah's descriptions between metal versus the other two. I'm going to read it with you, and we're going to see there are two differences between the way the Torah speaks about murder with a piece of metal versus murder with a piece of stone and a piece of wood. Okay, so let's keep that in the back of our mind as we read this. So Pasuk 17. Now the Torah, this chapter 35 of Bamidbar, happens to be talking about what Ben was mentioning before, unintentional murder. And now the Torah switches to intentional murder. The im be'eved yad, if he hits somebody with a stone the size of his hand, asher yamut ba, which is capable of killing. If A hits B with a stone that is the size of her hand and is capable of killing, vayamot, and the guy dies, rotzeachu, then he's a murderer. He's not an unintentional guy who goes and gets to go to exile to some city. Mot yumat rotzeach, the murderer has to die. That's stone. Now we get to wood. O bikli eitz yad, verse 18. Or if he hit with a piece of wood, yad, the size of his hand, asher yamutba, capable of killing, vihikaho, and he kills somebody, vayamot, he dies, rotzeachu, he's a murderer, motimat rotzeach, the murderer is put to death. Okay, that's stone, that's wood. Now let's back up and let's go to metal. Pasuk 16, I'm going backwards intentionally. The im bichli barzel hikahu, if he hits somebody with a metal instrument, it says here iron, he hit someone with an iron instrument, vayamot, and the guy died, rotzeachu, he's a murderer, motimat rotzeach, the murderer must die. So, I want you to look at those three verses, and can you tell me, or at least the two that I could fit on the page, and can you tell me what are two differences in the verses between metal versus the other ones? And I'll give
Can
you
I say it now or?
I found one that stands out a lot too.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So for both the stone and the wood, it says which is deadly, like when it's capable of murder. For the iron instrument, it's any iron instrument in general.
Okay,
It's not
excellent.
saying one that's capable
So
of murder.
what you're saying is correct, and there's two ways the Torah says it's capable of murder. One is by stone. It says yad. It's got to be the size of a hand. Asher yamutba, which will kill. So notice Rashi says, excellent. Notice Rashi says a stone large enough to fill a hand. And yeah. Okay, and it also says which is deadly. Excellent. But if we go back to iron, you're exactly 100% right. Let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says, now we're talking about premeditated murder, not unintentional. And it teaches that the implement, okay, before we go on, can you think of a reason why the Torah does not write which is deadly by a piece of iron? Now let me give you a little clue. If I shoot somebody, God forbid, is there a possibility that, and the guy drops dead 1 second later, is there a possibility the guy dropped dead of a heart attack, which would have happened at that exact second anyway? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Possible. Sure. But you don't assume that. Okay. So by the other two, why is the Torah telling me it has to have been deadly and a deadly size? You struck him with deadly force, be deadly size. If it didn't have deadly force and deadly size, what would you have assumed by the wood and by the stone?
That it wouldn't kill him.
Yeah, you have no right to assume that this is what killed him. If I blow on somebody and the person drops dead, you would not assume that I am the person who did that. You happen to blow up on a person. Okay, so now that being said, why would you say the Torah leaves out by iron? You hit someone with iron, they drop dead. Why does the Torah leave out the size and leaves out the force?
Because there would be really, with an iron instrument, it's no accident. It's not.
Good. You have the right to assume, if a guy drops dead right after you did it, the right to assume that was an act of murder because iron is different. Now, why is iron different? We shall see. Okay? Iron apparently is definitely more deadly. I think we can all agree on that. So let's see what Rashi says. Normally, Rashi says the implement of murder has to be big enough to cause death. For regarding all the other cases, it says asher yamutba, which is deadly. And the Targum renders that the Targum means the Aramaic translator says, you notice Rashi quotes Onkelos. Have you guys ever heard of Onkelos? I know it sounds like a funny name. Have you ever heard of Onkelos before? Okay. Onkelos was a Roman nobleman. He was from the royal family in Rome during the Jews' Roman exile. And Onkelos converted to Judaism. And he became a great sage, and he wrote a translation of the Torah into Aramaic. And Rashi quotes it all the time. The Romans tried to kill him on 3 different occasions, unsuccessfully, for converting. But that's neither here nor there. Rashi quotes the Onkelos translation, and it means when it says of a yad, it fits in the hand, of a size capable of causing death. Except in the case of iron, since it is Evident and known to the Holy One, blessed be He, it's known to God that a small piece of iron can kill, even a needle. This is why the Torah did not specify the size of which is deadly. Okay, now pause right there. That's it. Now, where did Rashi get this from? Because Rashi is quoting from our Talmud. So let's go to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is the body of oral law. It's a body of law. The Mishnah doesn't go into logic. It doesn't go into sources very often. It doesn't go into discussions. The Mishnah just says the law, and then the Talmud picks up and goes through the source and behind everything, and the logic behind everything. Okay? So let's read what the Mishnah says. Ve'elu hana eragin. These are people who get the death penalty through something called hereg. Hereg is the sword. Now, we explained in last class that it's very, very difficult for a person to get a death penalty in Jewish law because you have to have witnesses. The guy had to have been warned right before. We know that he knows it's wrong to do, and the witnesses have to be qualified witnesses. They can't be family members, and then we interrogate the witnesses, and we have all types of ways of throwing out the witnesses. But this is, at least in theory, these are people who get a death sentence. Rotseach shehika et re'ehu ba'evin. Somebody who kills his friend doesn't mean literally their best buddies, obviously. You don't usually kill your best buddy. Ba'evin, with a stone. Ova barzel, or with iron. Now, where's the Mishnah? Where do you think the Mishnah is getting these terms from?
The Torah.
Right out of the Torah. Good. Good. New case, which we have not seen yet. Vikavash alav l'toch hamayim. Or he holds somebody down inside the water that the guy cannot escape. So I push someone into the water and I put my hand on top of his head so he can't escape. Now, what does that imply to you, Mr. Poole? Let's say I push somebody into the water, but I don't hold them down. Would I be considered a murderer or not? If I don't hold them down, what's the implication?
The implication is if you do hold them down, you definitely are. And if you don't, it seems like you're kind of aiding in the murder, but you're not necessarily killing.
Good. Does that make you a good person? Absolutely not. We'll see what happens to you. But it's clear in the Mishnah that if you hold somebody down is what makes you a murderer. That means the guy can't escape. Go ahead, Jacob.
Rabbi, so what if if you're playing with your friends and if you push him in the pool, right? But if he lands wrong and then if he dies from it, so would that make you a very bad person or no?
I think you're going to need at least 2 more sessions until you have the answer to these questions. Mm-hmm. But we will see clearly indirect cause of damage or indirect murder.
Yeah, it was an accident.
That's because there's 2 terms you guys have to know. Okay? There's 2 terms you have to know. There's a word that's called exempt. It's called patur in Hebrew, which we'll soon see in the Mishnah. Exempt means you can't, an earthly court can't make you pay or can't make you responsible for it. And then there's another term called mutar, which means permissible. There is nobody who is ever going to say you may push somebody into a pool, even if you don't hold them down. It will never say permissible. An earthly court will not be able to adjudicate it, will not be able to deal with it. And we'll see, because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, it will be given to the heavenly court. And the reason is because there's a whole category of things which the earthly court cannot deal with. And they can't deal with because it's just something that only God can know. So let's go back to my original example. I don't want to confuse things too early, but let's go back to my original example. In my example where the 3rd grade teacher caused this student to get depressed, an earthly court cannot evaluate how much of that went into this murder. It's completely indirect, but Hashem can do that. So just because you get out scot-free from an earthly court does not make you not a murderer, but it will use the word, you will soon see the word will come up, patur. The earthly court can't do anything. They're humans. So if I push somebody into a pool, which we're about to see, and I don't put my hand on top of them, it's an indirect murder. Indirect. And whenever something is indirect, we're going to see it's impossible for a human court to decide how much were you responsible for. And therefore that goes to Hashem. It will never say permissible. You're a horrible person for doing that, and Hashem will take care of the person. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So that that goes back to your question, Jacob. So if I push somebody into a pool and I don't put my hand on top of them, we're about to see that I didn't directly murder the person. They aided the murder by not coming out of the pool. I did something horrible. And if I intended to murder them, Hashem will know what was in my brain and Hashem will take care of me. Okay? Keep that in the back of your mind. Right now we're just going through the cases and then we'll get to what the rationale and the logic and the applications. So it says, if I push someone into the water, I hold them down, o letocha or. Or is a fire. Or I push somebody into a fire. Ve'enu yachol la'alot misham, and they can't come up from it. Umeit, and they die chayav. I'm definitely guilty, because that is not indirect. If I hold them down inside of it, that's absolute direct murder, because I give them no chance to get out. However, dachfu l'toch hamayim, if I push them into water, now this is the opposite. O l'toch or into fire. V'yachol la'alot misham, and they could get out of it. Umeit, and then they die. Patur, I'm exempt. Now let me ask you a question. Does it ever use the word permissible? Is it permissible to push somebody into a fire and you know they'll have enough time to get out of it? No. I can guarantee you would at least get a detention for that, minimally, and probably much more. So we're going to see, I will give you guys, not this week, we're not going to have time for it this week, a whole biblical course on indirect versus direct, what happens if it's indirect, but all we know now is you're not guilty in an earthly court for murder. Okay. Similar cases now. Shisa bo takelev. That means if I set a dog against somebody, obviously we're talking about a dog which is capable of murder here. We're not talking about your pet Shih Tzu. We're talking about a pit bull or something that's violent. You set a dog against somebody. Or shisa bo tanachash. I set a snake against somebody, and it's not immediate. Patur, I'm exempt in an earthly court. The earthly court has no way to decide that I'm the murderer versus the victim's third grade teacher who depressed them. Maybe 10 years ago, the guy's doctor who was fixing an ingrown toenail didn't do it perfectly, and so the guy couldn't run away fast enough. All these things are beyond an earthly court. They can't charge a person on murder. However, hishich bo tanachash, if I put the snake directly on the person, and the Talmud will explain later on that over here, by a snake specifically, the venom, that means the poison, is right there. So in that case, it's like putting a bullet in a person. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev, we have a debate. Rabbi Yehuda says you're guilty as a murderer. Chachamim potrin, and the sages say no, you're exempt. The Talmud is going to go through all these cases and explain all of them. Okay, let's take a look at the Talmud, how the Talmud starts. Amar Shmuel, the sage named Shmuel said, just closing the door. Mipnei malu nemra yad bebarzel. Why does the Torah not say the word the size of a hand when it comes to iron? By what does he mean to say? What he means to say is we just saw that the Torah uses the expression, the size of a hand, by stone and by wood. And therefore, he notices a discrepancy that it doesn't say it by iron. Why doesn't it say it by iron? So it says, as you guys pointed out, Sheha barzel memit b'kol shehu. It must be that iron kills even with a small, tiny amount. You don't need it to be a certain size. So that means whenever I kill somebody and somebody drops dead, there's always a question that judges are going to have to ask themselves, are you really the murderer? Maybe the guy had a heart attack. So if I drop a feather on somebody and they fall down and they collapse, the courts will say you're not the murderer. So if it's a wooden block, which is smaller than the size of a hand, you have the right, the judges, is it possible I murdered him with a piece of wood? Yes. Is it possible the guy's so fragile that he died from a piece of wood, a tiny splinter? It's possible. It's possible. But just because something's possible doesn't mean they have the right to say you're a murderer. That doesn't give them the right to do that. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Therefore, by wood, unless it's the size of a fist, they would not assume you to be the murderer. They can't prove that you're the murderer. By stone, they can't prove it. Only by iron, and the guy drops dead. The next second, they have the right to assume that. Now the question is, why is iron different? Why is iron different exactly? What makes iron different? Okay. So let's continue. Tanya Nami Hachi, it was also taught in a Baraita. So let me tell you what a Baraita is. A Baraita is a body of law that's very similar to the Mishnah. And in that, it was written in the same period of time by the same rabbis. It's just that it didn't make it into the Mishnah. It came a little bit later. Okay? Now, the Gemara, the Talmud, which we're reading right now, will never argue on a Mishnah or a Baraita. It's understood. You learn from them. You can't argue on them. They know better than us. Because it's quoting, the Baraita is always quoting the oral law. So we're saying, Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned the same idea in a Baraita. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe said, now Rebbe is an acronym for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. What was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi famous for if you took Jewish history? What is he most famous for?
Didn't he codify the Mishnah?
He compiled the Mishnah, exactly. Excellent. Galui v'yadua, it is revealed and known. Lifnei misha amar v'haya ha'olam, in front of the one who said, let the world come into existence. In other words, in front of God. Sheham barzel memit b'chol shehu, that iron can kill even in the smallest amount. Iron can kill even the smallest amount. Lefikach, therefore, lo nitna Torah boshir, the Torah doesn't give a size to it. Now, let me ask you a question. If I drop a needle on top of somebody and the guy drops dead, is that logical to you that you would assume I'm the murderer? I just dropped a needle on somebody? So the Talmud says, no. Vahani mili, and this only applies de barze mivraz, when the guy was stabbed with it. If I stab somebody with a needle, there are multiple parts of the body, as we'll soon see in Rashi. There are multiple parts of the body which a puncture can kill somebody. So if I stab somebody and the guy drops dead, the next second, you have a right to assume that this was an act of murder. So before we see Rashi, can anybody here give me an example of an area of the body where if you stab somebody with a needle, it can cause their death?
The head.
Carotid artery.
The heart.
Good. An artery, the heart, the lungs, the esophagus. All these are areas where you can't have a puncture. Okay. Now, we're going to have now a debate between two commentators of what does the Talmud mean when it says that iron will kill even in the smallest bit. Remember this. Just remember this. It's possible if I drop a feather on somebody and they died, it's possible that I'm the murderer. It's possible. But only Hashem can deal with that. When we say somebody is a murderer or isn't a murderer, we're talking about the human court. The human court has to go with innocent until proven guilty. They need proof. So if I drop a feather and somebody dies, the court will say the person had a heart attack. But the court has the right to say, says the Talmud, that if you stab somebody with a needle and they drop dead the next second, the court has a right to say that that is empirical evidence that you killed the person. Why? What is about the needle exactly? So we're going to see Rashi, and then this is a great opportunity to introduce you to Tosafot. Tosafot is going to challenge Rashi, so it gets really fun. Here we go. I'm going to click on commentaries. We're going to go to Rashi on this little piece. There's one piece of Rashi. Perfect. All right. So Rashi says, they don't have Rashi in English. That's okay, though. The Mivriz, Barze Mivriz, which we know because you guys saw the English translation means it punctures. It punctures. So Rashi says, punch balaz. Rashi translates it into French. Rashi was from France. He translates these words to mean some type of like pinch maybe. I don't know. It's an ancient French word. Now Rashi explains, aval hikaho la'arko. But if you hit somebody in the length of the needle, that means you didn't stab them with it. Based on this Talmud, what would be the law, guys? You tell me yourself. If you just hit somebody with a needle instead of stabbing them with a needle, what would be the law?
You're a murderer.
No, then you're
hit
not
them
a
instead of stabbing them.
Then you're not a murderer.
Until what? Rashi
Mhm.
says, Shi'ura bai. If you would have hit them, derech hakah, by hitting them with it, hakah is to hit, you would need the same size as you do by everything else. So just like the Torah says, there has to be the size of capability of murder and force of murder by wood and by stone to assume that you're a murderer. The only reason the Talmud says that Hashem made an exception by iron is because you puncture somebody, and you could puncture somebody in an area where it's delicate. Now, I should have done the Rashi before this with you. Let me go to the Rashi before this. Okay, look at what Rashi says before this. Shahabarzel mimit b'kol that iron could kill even in the smallest amount. Al yedei tchiva, through stabbing. Shetochiv lo machat, for example, you stick the needle beveshet, that's in the guy's food pipe, in the esophagus, o belibor, in his heart. That means if you would stab a guy in his leg, in his calf, is that what we're talking about? According to Rashi, if you would stab a guy with a needle in his calf, would we assume, do we have the right to assume you're a murderer in that case? Again, Rashi says that a needle can kill through stabbing. Rashi's example is, for example, if you stick the needle into the esophagus or the heart. Why is Rashi giving those specific examples?
Because you can die from those.
You can die from those. If you would stab a person with a needle in their calf, a person doesn't die from that. Is it possible they would die from that?
Yeah.
Yes. Does the court have the right to assume you're a murderer because of that? No. So let's review what we just saw according to Rashi, because Tosafot is going to disagree with Rashi. According to Rashi, the Talmud is saying the following. The Torah makes a discrepancy. It says a size and a force by stone and wood. It does not say a size and a force by iron. And the Talmud says the reason is it wants to teach me a law. The Torah is teaching me a law that it's possible by iron to even be but the smallest size that you could kill somebody and we'll assume you're a murderer. Rashi explains that through stabbing, if a guy, doesn't mean any stabbing, if a guy were to stab with iron in an area which is essential, like the heart or the esophagus, and then the victim drops dead the next second, the Hashem is teaching us, by not writing a size, Hashem is teaching us the court would have a right to assume the guy is a murderer. Is that fair? What I just said, everything I just said? That's good? Jacob Tzvi, you look unhappy. Good? Okay. I'm going to challenge this. We can challenge this. If the case that we're talking about is where, let's say A goes and stabs B in the heart with a needle, and we're saying this is a special law by iron. This is a special law by iron. If we're talking about stabbing in the heart, what would be if you take a wooden splinter? A wooden splinter, you go into your cupboard right now and you take a toothpick and you stab somebody in the heart with it, and the guy drops dead. Forget the Talmud for a minute. The guy drops dead the next second. Like, terrorists are very creative of the types of things that they've taken on airplanes, especially before 9/11, when you could take anything you wanted. All right? Would you not assume that the guy murdered? If you take a toothpick of wood, wouldn't you assume the guy, that's a murder? If we're talking about stabbing in the heart? Yes or no? What do you say?
Yes, I would assume that's a murder.
I would also assume that's a murder. So Tosafot's challenge is going to be, hey, Mr. Rashi, you gave examples, though, what we mean by stabbing is piercing the heart or piercing the esophagus. The Torah is clearly saying there's a distinction between iron and wood. If you're talking about stabbing a guy in the heart, wood would be the same thing. Wood would be the same thing. If you stab a guy in the heart with a toothpick, I would assume you're a murderer too. So that can't be what the Talmud's case is, because then there'd be no distinction between that and iron. That's going to be the challenge to Rashi. Now, let me explain to you who Tosafot is. Tosafot is not a person. Tosafot is a school of 200 rabbis that lived in Germany and France and Western Europe. It was headed by Rashi's own grandchild. The one who argues on Rashi the most in the Talmud is Rashi's own grandchildren. They loved Rashi. They respected him. That's why, that's why they felt compelled to say, I disagree with you respectfully. Let's see what they say. Let's see what they say. And then maybe we can even defend Rashi. So now, I'm going to go back to commentary. Let's try this one. Let's try, hold on. Commentary, Tosafot. No Tosafot, so it's on the line before. Sorry. That's the thing with this. Okay. Tosafot. There we go. This is the one I want. Follow me. Barzel mimit b'kol shehu. Iron kills even in the smallest amount. All right? We only have like 5 minutes left. Let's get through this Tosafot and then we'll call it a day. Pirush b'kuntris. It is explained in the notebook. Whenever Tosafot quotes the notebook, he means Rashi. They had a notebook from Rashi where they had Rashi's commentary. It is explained in the notebook that what we're talking about is, for example, shetochiv lo machat, that somebody stabbed a needle, an iron needle, beveshet, either into the esophagus, obelib, or into the heart. So says Tosfot, vikasha. I have a question on that. If that's what the Talmud means, this stands for imkain. If that's so, afilu kotznami, even a thorn, a little thorn made up of a piece of a twig of wood. You could also stab somebody in the heart and they die. You could also stab them in the esophagus and they would die. So that can't be the case where there's a distinction in the Torah between iron to wood. Can't be talking about a pierce in the heart because wood could do the exact same thing. Is the question clear? The challenge on Rashi? Rashi's explanation? Jacob Tzvi? Yeah, it's good?
Yeah. I was going to ask that, but like with the stone. Like I was going to ask that.
Excellent.
Excellent.
If you were going to ask that means you're on the ball right now. So Tosafot is going to explain the Talmud differently. He's going to explain the Talmud differently. Rather, you know what it means that iron is different? Even the smallest amount iron can kill. It doesn't mean stabbing someone in the heart. That applies to stone, that applies to wood. Elanira, rather it seems to us, Mishum de Amar beperak Rabbi Eliezer de Mila, Tosafot quotes another place in the Talmud, Uve perak behema makasha, and in another chapter, he quotes 2 different chapters in the Talmud, Uve ha'aral in a 3rd chapter, where it says, the Barzla Mizrif Zarif, that we know that iron burns somebody, which if you read that Talmud, you know what it means? It means it gives infection to somebody. So you're right. If you would stab somebody in the heart, that would be iron, wood, stone, any material. You stab someone in the heart and they die a moment later, we have the right to assume you're a murderer. The case of the distinction between iron and everything else is where you took the iron and you stabbed him in the leg. But when you stabbed him in the leg and the guy gets sick from it, and then you see them die a week later, you have the right to assume, as long as there was a guy got sick, you have the right to assume that iron carries infection because you know that iron is a conductor. This is Corona 101. There are certain things which carry germs better than other things, and iron is one of them. Iron is a conductor. So what it means is the case of the distinction will be where you stab a guy in the leg and then the guy dies, not even necessarily right away, but he gets an infection from it. You have even a needle that's a teeny size, the Torah is telling me, you have the right to assume the guy's a murderer. Whereas if somebody stabs somebody with a piece of wood in the leg, since it doesn't cause infection, the guy dies a little bit later, you would not have the right to assume the guy is a murderer. He could have been a cause of murder, like if you hurt an old person, if they get injured, if their bones break, that could be the start of something, but that would be what we're going to discuss next time, which is indirect. Indirect, the court can't punish you. That goes to Hashem. But by iron, that's direct. By iron, if somebody stabs somebody and they get an infection, that's the difference between iron and everything else. So we have this debate between Rashi and Tosafot. Rashi says the Talmud means iron is different because you could kill somebody by stabbing them in the heart. Tosafot says then that's the same thing by wood. Rather, Tosafot says the Talmud means that iron causes infection, and that's why they would have a right to assume the guy is a murderer. Now, believe it or not, there's a defense of Rashi, which I'm not going to get into today, because I want to be really good about finishing on time so that nobody feels like it becomes too burdensome, okay? But you could think about it yourself. Is there a defense of Rashi? All right, guys, I want to wish you an amazing Shavuot, and hopefully we'll pick up on Sunday. Sound good?
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Fantastic. Okay. Be well, guys.
Rabbi, can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
They can leave. Like, I just have to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about a question and I wrote it down. Was this kind of like what we were talking about? So I said that it doesn't make sense